I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, and welcome to the Alaska Weather Show on this Saturday, October 1st. We try to bring this program each night to you through a unique partnership with Alaska Public Media. If you ever want additional weather information, you can go to weather.gov, the National Weather Service's online presence. It's a point-and-click interactive map that shows you the continental U.S. as well as Alaska and Hawaii to the lower left. The good news is on the map this afternoon, we don't have any high order warnings or advisories up at this time. Fortunately, Hurricane Ian has since diminished to a tropical depression, but still in the aftermath we have a tremendous amount of cleanup and recovery going on across Florida and parts of the Carolinas, and some ongoing flooding from the heavy rainfall that was associated with that storm. But here in Alaska, the northern panhandle rains have wound down. They are now scattered showers there. Flood warnings, advisories also in the process of coming down and winding down. Talk about that in a moment. We expect water levels 2 to maybe as much as 3 feet above normal high tide around Kuskokwim Bay and the southwest side of Nunavik Island as we go into Sunday as the result of a low pressure system that will continue to weaken as it moves into the southeast corner there of the Bering Sea, Bristol Bay area. Accumulating snows across the eastern Brooks Range will also begin to wind down tonight and especially on Sunday, though there still will be some lingering scattered showers, and we're going to keep an eye on a potentially strong storm that'll work its way across eastern Russia and impact the northern Bering and Chukchi seas later on October 5th through Thursday the 6th and Friday the 7th, and that could have impacts to the state. Otherwise, let's look at Arctic Village there. Accumulating snow, looks like at least a good 4 inches or so, maybe a bit more. Temperature just below freezing this afternoon. Juneau area, some breaks in the cloud cover. The heavier rains have shut off with the temperature there this afternoon at 55 degrees. So the flood warnings and advisories in the northern panhandle, this is where they stand. The Taya River, that will be allowed to expire at 4 p.m. this Saturday afternoon. It crested near 19.5 feet, well into moderate flood stage this Saturday morning. And Jordan Creek crested this Saturday morning around 11 a.m. near 11 feet. That's near the Juneau area. And the flood warning for Jordan Creek will continue at least until 10 p.m. This Saturday evening. We have flood advisories that will continue in effect at the Chilkat River and Porcupine Creek through 1 a.m. Sunday morning, and Falls Creek near Petersburg through 10 p.m. This Saturday evening. But overall, water levels are coming down. You can see that crest there on the Taya River, almost to 19.5 feet this Saturday morning, coming down below flood stage as we get into the day on Sunday. And Jordan Creek peaking near 11 feet will be coming down below minor flood stage as we go into the day, into Sunday morning. And a quick check here, special weather statement regarding that storm later on this week, upcoming week. Chukchi Sea northward, especially from the Bering Strait on up toward Utqiagvik, there is an enhanced possibility of some storm surge, coastal flooding as a result of a stronger wind and wave action there, especially Thursday and on Friday. And the areas around Norton Sound and the south side of the Seward Peninsula, including St. Lawrence Island, could see an elevated risk of some erosion and a higher surf as a result of being on the southern extent of this storm system Thursday and Friday. So stay tuned to later forecasts, because especially that area around North Sound has been certainly more vulnerable now after the historic storm that happened a couple weekends ago. We're not anticipating a storm of that magnitude into Norton Sound, but because you're more vulnerable with the damage that has occurred to the coastline there, you'll want to stay tuned to later forecasts. And a quick check of satellite imagery shows the moisture pushing upward into the Yukon Territory, with still a moisture feed coming into the central southern panhandle, and the curl in the clouds out there toward the central portion of the Bering Sea just west of St. Paul. That is the remnant circulation of Typhoon Kolop. And that is the system that's going to continue to weaken as it works its way eastward into Bristol Bay here later on Sunday. So here is the low this afternoon out there over the central Bering just west of St. Paul. We have another weakening low just on the east side of Kodiak Island, and a moisture feed that comes on up into the southern half there of the Panhandle. And looking at later tonight into early Sunday morning, the low that's going to push east of St. Paul and then begin to weaken as it moves into Bristol Bay. A secondary low is going to take shape there way out toward the western Aleutians, the lower southwestern portion of the Bering Sea. High pressure otherwise there nudging into the lower Panhandle and up along the Arctic coast. And then here's that low, another low there passing north of the central Aleutians Sunday afternoon with a weakening low there near Kuskokwim Bay. But as I mentioned, water levels could be a couple of feet higher than normal high tide in areas of Kuskokwim Bay and perhaps on the southwest side of Nunavik Island. By Monday, we expect that storm to have a little more oomph to it as it's passing just north of the eastern Aleutians. And as a result, that frontal system could have also, it's not going to be a major system, but you see hints of that Russian system just on the edge of your screen. That will not be moving across eastern Russia, though, until Wednesday and Wednesday night, pushing that system in through the west coast and northwest coast here for later in the upcoming week. Temperatures, lows will be in the 40s across much of the area where it is cloudy, 30s in the interior south. Highs could reach lower 60s, southern Panhandle around Craig, Metlakatla. Near 50 Anchorage south through much of the Kenai Peninsula, 56 at Kodiak Island. And then as we go into Monday morning, temperatures generally in the 30s up there toward Glen Allen, Talkeetna, but still in the 40s elsewhere. And high temperatures Monday afternoon, even middle 60s there, the southern portion of the Panhandle. Maybe getting back up into the lower 50s around Anchorage, as well as at McGrath and Glen Allen, approaching 50 degrees. Colder temperatures below freezing, some teens and 20s there along the Brooks Range, North Slope, Arctic coast, nearing freezing areas of the Seward Peninsula and upward through the Yukon Valley. Sunday afternoon highs will stay below freezing, North Slope, Arctic coast, but get back up into the 40s, Seward Peninsula, eastward along the Yukon River. And then Monday morning lows again below freezing with some 10 above 15 degree range temperatures there along the Brooks Range. And generally near just above freezing, mid-30s there, the Seward Peninsula, with temperatures Monday afternoon still getting back up into the 40s along the Yukon River, but staying below freezing there, Brooks Range along the North Slope. Lows above freezing in the 30s across the interior southwest, 40s extending out through the Aleutians, and 40s to maybe near 50 at Bethel and, say, King Salmon, Dillingham areas on Sunday afternoon. Should see temperatures still staying above freezing there across the interior southwest, 40s elsewhere, and then Monday afternoon we expect highs generally in the 40s to around 50 degrees across much of the southwest, and lower 50s extending out along the Aleutian chain and the Alaska Peninsula. Still looking like above normal temperatures across much of the state, especially the southeast interior, northern Gulf into the Panhandle. October 7th through the 11th with a good chance of above normal precipitation, especially between the Alaska and Brooks Range there across the central and east central interior, centered on Fairbanks in that time frame.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Let's check out your aviation weather now, and if you have a flight planned either on Sunday or Monday. A couple of main weather features. We have a weakening low pressure in the southeast corner of the Bering around Bristol Bay. Another one that's going to be taking shape over the lower half of the central Bering just north of the western and central Aleutians, and that'll be working its way eastward early in the week. And then we have some IFR conditions Sunday morning off to the north along the Arctic coast, and the snows that were occurring at least Friday night into Saturday over the eastern Brooks Range should push more eastward, but there could be IFR conditions there along the middle upper Yukon Valley to the Alcan border. And as we go into Sunday afternoon, we expect conditions in the far north along the northwest to improve to VFR. However, along the Gulf Coast, from Yakutat back toward Prince William Sound, east side of the Kenai, and areas of the Cook Inlet, we expect IFR conditions, as well as along the southwest coast there. near Dillingham and out over the Bering back through the central Aleutians. Monday morning, look for IFR conditions continuing along areas of the north central and northwestern Gulf Coast, including Prince William Sound, at least the northern two-thirds of Cook Inlet across the southwest interior, and along the southwest coast, as well as up toward St. Lawrence and St. Matthew Islands. And for Monday afternoon, we expect IFR conditions to be mainly confined with this next area of low pressure and frontal system approaching there along the southwest coast, the lower Yukon and Kuskokwim deltas down into Bristol Bay and the central Alaska Peninsula. We expect IFR conditions north of Anaktuvuk Pass along the north slope there Sunday morning. Otherwise, look for MVFR conditions to become VFR as Sunday unfolds. Same thing there at Adigan Pass in the morning. IFR conditions if you're flying north of the north entrance. Otherwise, MVFR conditions will give way to VFR conditions. Lake Clark and Merrill should generally hold on to IFR conditions during the day on Sunday, but the further west you fly, you will encounter MVFR conditions by afternoon, especially there west of the west entrances. Same thing for Rainy Pass. Look for MVFR conditions west of the west entrance, but otherwise generally IFR conditions holding there through Rainy Pass on Sunday. Also, same thing as expected, Windy Pass, IFR generally speaking, but once you fly north of Windy Pass, you'll encounter MVFR conditions. Isabel Pass should start out IFR, giving way to MVFR, and then Metasta Pass may be able to hang on to mainly VFR conditions on Sunday, though as you fly further south of the south entrance, look for MVFR conditions. Further south and west of there, IFR should dominate at Tanita Pass as well as at Portage Passes. And then finally, in the far northern panhandle, we expect VFR conditions at Chilkoot and White for Sunday. Freezing levels have come down and remain around 2,000 feet aloft there through the central interior, running along the middle upper Yukon Valley and River. As we go further south, the 4,000 foot freezing level aloft is pushed into the northern Gulf to the eastern Aleutians. We still have freezing levels upwards around 10,000 feet, the far end of the panhandle around Craig and Ketchikan. Greatest threat for icing will be along areas of the central and northwestern Gulf Coast, west of Yakutat on through Prince William Sound, the east side of the Kenai. Also around that weakening area of low pressure in the southeast corner of the Bering Sea around Bristol Bay between 7 and 17,000 feet. And then finally, looking at upper level jet stream winds, we have a high pressure circulation there at 30,000 feet aloft over the lower Chukchi Sea, Bering Strait. Weakening low that'll be over Bristol Bay, and then another low taking shape out over the lower Bering Sea just north of the western and central Aleutians, bringing it down to 700 millibars, 9,000 feet. We see that low pressure circulation over Bristol Bay with a broad area of southwest winds coming onshore through the northern Gulf, 40 to 50 knots, and then stronger winds back out toward the tip of the Alaska Peninsula and especially there in through the central Aleutians, 70 knot winds at 9,000 feet. And further down, 3,000 foot level winds. We have the low pressure circulation again sitting there over the southeast corner of the Bering, north of the Alaska Peninsula, with winds upwards of 35 to 40 knots coming in toward the area near Yakutat in the northeastern Gulf, back across the Alaska Peninsula around 40, 45 knots, and then back through the central and western Aleutians, winds as high as 45 upwards to 60 knots, circulating around that next developing low. And we do expect turbulence to be moderate, considerable moderate there across much of the Aleutian chain into the tip of the Alaska Peninsula. Could not rule out some isolated severe turbulence on Sunday across the central Aleutians, and then pockets there of moderate turbulence around Kodiak Island and along the north central Gulf.
Leatherbacks are the largest turtles on Earth, growing up to 7 feet long and weighing more than 2,000 pounds. These sea turtles are among the most highly migratory animals on Earth, some traveling up to 10,000 miles a year between their nesting and feeding grounds. Prevalent in every ocean except the Arctic and Antarctic, the species overall is declining, more so in the Pacific. In the eastern Pacific, the Mexican population was once thought to be the largest in the world and has experienced an alarming decline.
This trajectory of decline that we've seen and actually collapse. We're talking about only 20 or 30 turtles nesting every year, where thousands used to just 40 years ago. That's the kind of dramatic decline.
The western Pacific population has been declining steadily, and it's particularly critical to act now before it collapses, while there are enough turtles and nests to respond to conservation measures. But threats to all leatherbacks in the Pacific need to be addressed.
The top threats to populations are uncontrolled coastal development, all the bad stuff on the nesting beaches, egg harvest, poaching of the females, predation on the eggs by dogs and pigs. Deforestation makes the sand too warm and dry and the eggs don't hatch. Another one is incidental capture in fishing gear. During their vast migrations, they get caught in fishing gear throughout the Pacific. And finally, marine debris, which the leatherbacks mistake for their favorite food, jellyfish, and they choke on those.
Protecting leatherbacks in U.S. waters alone is not enough to ensure the continued existence of the species. The highly migratory nature of Pacific leatherbacks requires cooperation and international collaboration. NOAA is focusing on partnerships with Mexico, Central America, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands in the Pacific.
Our action plan promotes a holistic recovery strategy that addresses all the sources of mortality. So that's basically ensuring that the remaining nesting sites are protected. And the nests produce as many hatchlings as possible. And then secondly, in tandem with that, is reducing the fisheries-related mortalities. We're working with international partners to incentivize community participation on the nesting beach conservation and developing alternative livelihood programs that wean communities off leatherback resources and introduce alternative methods for food and income. Recovery is going to take a long time, on the order of 20 to 30 years at least, before we see some of these actions bear fruit. But here in the US, we can all help leatherbacks by making seafood choices, for instance, that support sustainable fishing practices. And beachgoers can certainly do their part by keeping our oceans clean of plastic debris, picking up marine litter, particularly plastic bags.
Together with our partners, we are strengthening protection and conservation efforts to ensure a future for leatherbacks, helping them to survive and once again thrive in the waters of the Pacific Ocean.
For over 40 years, NOAA scientists have been collecting data and piecing together the story of the gray whale. Each year, new discoveries are made, revealing the secrets of this ancient traveler. With the northeastern Pacific population recovered, leading scientists from the NOAA Southwest Fisheries Science Center continue their research efforts to help save the western population from extinction. The most effective way to identify individuals and count the population is to photograph them from the surface. Using the gray whale's distinctive markings and gray spots caused by parasites on their skin, scientists document these characteristics to identify individuals.
So we're able to track migratory pathways and corridors by the simple use of photo identification. There are other ways to do that as well, biopsy sampling and genetics.
And from the air.
Aerial photography is one way you can study animals based on their size and shape. So you can learn a lot about nutritive and reproductive condition of whales just by measuring their size and shape from vertical aerial photographs.
You can also put satellite transmitters on them and track them remotely. You put the transmitter on and let them go, and you watch them move across the Pacific or down to China or wherever it might be.
To further learn and discover where these great sojourners swim, The team of researchers traveled to Russia and set up camp on Sakhalin Island.
The main focus of our research while we were on Sakhalin was to collect photo identification. If it was a whale that we had not collected a genetic sample from previously, we would also attempt to collect a sample from the whales.
Whereas whales are endowed with natural insulation, their human observers must gear up to brave the cold in order to study these marine giants up close.
We're typically only able to work about 1/3 of the time that we're there, and that's mostly due to this fog that just invades the area and sits sometimes for weeks on end. So it can be very challenging to try and do field work in this site.
Recently, 2 whales from the western population surprised scientists by migrating across the Pacific to the waters of California and Mexico.
It's a really fun finding. It's added another piece to the puzzle that we didn't previously know about. And I would have to say that it's opened up more questions than we had before.
Research scientists from Japan, Russia, and the United States share images of animals they've spotted.
We take a photograph of an individual off of Sakhalin Island, and we get a phone call from Japanese scientists, and they say, hey, guess what? We've got a picture of a gray whale in Japan. We say, can you send it to us? We'd love to try and match it. They'll send us the picture, we'll compare it to our catalog, and we'll say, hey, we've got a match from Sakhalin to Japan.
Unlike many species of whales that still remain on the endangered species list, the eastern Pacific gray whale, once on the brink of extinction, now numbers about 20,000 individuals. Recovery efforts that started 40 years ago and the ongoing research and monitoring by NOAA scientists have contributed to the conservation of the gray whales. Together, with legal protection and public education, scientists are playing their part to ensure the survival of this magnificent migratory animal.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Let's look at the sea ice edge here before we dive into the marine forecast. And we are starting to see a little bit of ice develop along the Arctic and northwest coast, even down into Kotzebue Sound. This trend will continue, but we will be keeping an eye on a stronger storm system coming out of eastern Russia mid and late this upcoming week, especially Wednesday evening and on Thursday and Friday. Have some stronger winds that could cause higher surf and potentially some storm surge there across areas of the Chukchi Sea as the result of the wind-driven waves. But looking at the southeast panhandle, mixed bag of winds, 10 to 15 knots for the inner channels, waves generally running 2 to 3 feet. The outer coast, look for northwest to north winds south of Sitka to Craig, 10 to 15 knots, waves about 7 feet, and then southerly winds 20 to 25 knots. Northwest of Sitka up through west of Yakutat with waves of 7 to 9 feet. On Monday, winds still a bit of a mixed bag there and through the inner channels, north to northwest, Petersburg down through Ketchikan, around 10 knots, waves 2 feet, and Lynn Canal, south winds 10 knots and waves 2 feet. Outer coast, winds will generally be out of the southwest 10 to 15 knots, though more northerly off of Craig, and waves generally running 6 to 7 feet. The northwestern Gulf will see south winds at 15 to 20 knots off the Kenai up into Prince William Sound, waves 7 feet off the Kenai, 4 feet there within Prince William Sound, and look for south winds, southeasterly winds to 20 knots, middle lower Cook Inlet with waves of 4 to 5 feet, northeast winds with 3-foot waves there in the far north end of Cook Inlet. And then on Monday, winds will pick up at the entrance of Cook Inlet upwards to 30 knots, creating waves as high as 8 to 10 feet. Look for variable winds up toward Anchorage as you get toward Turnagain Arm with winds variable 15 knots, waves 3 feet. Easterly winds Prince William Sound with waves there running a few feet. And then off the Kenai, 25 knot winds out of the southeast with 6-foot waves. A wind max, which was once a hurricane force and storm force winds, will diminish as it works its way into Bristol Bay. 35 knot gales there north of Cold Bay on Sunday, waves as high as 15 to near 20 feet. there on the Bering side. Otherwise, south winds 20 to 25 knots around Kodiak Island, 25 to 30 knots on the North Pacific side with waves of 9 to 12 feet. And for Monday, we expect winds to be southeasterly 20 to 25 knots around Kodiak Island, waves 4 to 7 feet. As we extend out along the Alaska Peninsula, look for southeast winds to turn more south and southwest to 30 knots. Waves 8 to 10 feet on the North Pacific side, 7 to 11 feet there on the Bering side. And going out through the Aleutians, winds will generally have a west to southwest component, 30 to 35 knots central and eastern Aleutians, but upwards to 50 knot storm force winds west of between Adak and Kiska. Waves on the North Pacific side, 12 to 14 feet, and anywhere from around 13 to as high as 20 feet there, especially northeast of Dutch Harbor. And then on Monday, winds will generally be out of the west at 35 to 40 knots, with waves running 13 to 17 feet on the North Pacific side, and generally 16 to near 20 feet on the Bering side. And on Sunday, with that wind and the low pressure that's coming into Bristol Bay and weakening, it could cause higher water levels around Kuskokwim Bay up toward the south side of Nunavik Island, maybe 2 to 3 feet above normal high tide. And we see that counterclockwise circulation low will be situated just southwest there of Nunavik Island. And St. Paul, St. George, look for waves as high as 15 feet. Look for more of an easterly flow still out of Norton Sound with 4-foot waves and northeast winds 20 to 25 knots, often north of Nunavik Island with waves of 8 to 10 feet. Then across the area on Monday, we still see a low circulation near St. Paul, and winds 25 to 30 knots there through the lower eastern portion of the Bering with waves 9 to 11 feet. Easterly flow continues out of Norton Sound, south of St. Lawrence with waves of 4 to 5 feet. Along the Arctic coast, winds will be generally out of the east at 15 knots, waves 3 feet. Off the lower Chukchi Sea, 15 to 20 knot easterly winds with waves running 4 to 6 feet. Northeast winds off of the Seward Peninsula there to 20 knots with waves 8 feet on the north side of St. Lawrence. And for Monday, east to southeast winds 15 to 20 knots, Kaktovik through Utqiagvik and Point Lay, waves 4 to 5 feet. And then look for easterly winds lower Chukchi Sea through the Bering Strait and the north side of St. Lawrence, with waves generally running in the 3 to 5 foot range.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.